see me okay? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, man, everything's good, volume-wise,
yeah,
clarity-wise. It's almost too clear. I can see everything.
Yeah, that's the point. I want to show all my all the flaws. I want people to see the HD version of PFed BJJ.
Hey, man, nothing left behind, right?
I was in makeup for 4 hours before this. So
man, this podcast is growing. Makeup artist now too.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do with this face. So I'm just trying to get. Basically, I started the podcast because I wanted to save up enough money for plastic surgery. So I'm gonna actually bring them to the. I'm gonna bring a picture of Brandon Rynka to the surgeon and go, do what you can, bro. I know you don't have a lot to work with here, but this is the goal right here. I've said that to 3 doctors and they've laughed me out of the office. So
will people get confused if I have the Fear Being Average podcast?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to talk to the makeup artists and the sponsors about that, but we should be all right. We should be all right. No, for sure, man. That's awesome. I just expected you to be like shaky on your phone. Like I half expected you to be in the middle of a run during this.
Would have been more optimal, I guess, during a training session.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
So how's everything with you, buddy?
Good. Well, let me just kick this off here.
Oh,
I got notes here. I got everything. All right, guys. Okay. My guest today is just a general stud of a human being, keeping with the theme of the podcast. We are no slouches on this podcast. You might have seen this guy running through your neighborhood with a tree strapped on his back. That's how I found out about this guy. So, lifestyle, fitness, and motivational guru, I would say. Is that fair enough?
Guru, I don't know about that, but I'll take the other stuff.
Well, there's a whole list here. Hang on. I haven't even started yet. That's just so creator of Brandon Rynka 365 website with a lot of training, performance, wellness, lifestyle tips and tricks. Host of the Fear Being Average podcast. As you can see, as he's ruthlessly promoting in the background, trying to steal my thunder here. Co-host of the 2 Athletes and a Mic podcast.
Yeah.
This guy can't just have one podcast. He's got to steal the whole goddamn thing. Strength and endurance and adventure athlete. Ultimate get shit done guy. I would say you're maybe the Canadian Gary V. Is that fair to say?
Wow, I never heard that, but I like that.
I'm just throwing that out there. If you want to run with that, it's yours.
I could run with it, sure.
No Gi BJJ competitor as well. And on August 14th, he starts his newest adventure, North America's strongest ultra endurance project. I cannot wait to hear how many trees are involved with this. But Brandon Rynka is here. I'm going to cue an applause track of just women cheering with
I like that. What's going on, PFed?
I'm not doing too bad, man. I mean, it's been a rough go a little bit, but I've been kind of managing. But how have you been? Like, I haven't seen you probably since what we did. You were kind enough to have me on your podcast in December.
You earned it.
It was a slow week. So Brandon didn't have any takers, and he said, I'm going to have Paul Federici on. No, but I really appreciated that. But it's been probably since December, and so, like, you know, you're the perfect guy, honestly, to have on right now because the world has lost its goddamn mind, and people are unmotivated, they're fat, we're losing conditioning, we haven't been to the gym. How have you been, and what has changed for you, and how are you staying so active and motivated through this? I just want to know because I need some tips.
Okay. Yeah, things are good, Paul.
Yeah.
Honestly, man, life is good considering the circumstances. I guess like you were saying, right? It's an opportunity that you got to look at. Sometimes it can be a negative, it can be a positive, but again, you got to make the best out of it because this is the hand we have been dealt.
Yep.
You know, regardless of if you like it or not, things were closed, and you got to make the best out of it. So for me, it's been good. I was able to start up a little bit more of a side business with my own personal training. I was working out of a gym. But a lot of clients started working with me. So I had to get a little morning thing going, and I've had that for 4 or 5 months or however long COVID-19 has been going on for. Seems like
about
12 years.
Yeah, it seems like I feel like I've aged like Obama in office, you know, like the 8-year presidential aging has happened to me in 5 months, I think.
For a lot of people. So, I've been busy with that, and like you know me, I just kind of get involved with a lot of projects, almost sometimes to my detriment where I do too many things, but I stay busy, and it's my job, right? At the end of the day, I'm in the health and fitness, business, so it's not that hard for me to get out and do stuff. And like I said, I come up with these, these neat little ventures just to kind of keep myself busy. And again, it gives me a little motivation I like having something to dig my teeth into, especially from a physical nature. It just motivates me to have a goal to pursue. I get bored easily if I don't have something to get really good at and grow on. So for me, it was just made sense that, this is kind of what my new shtick every summer is, to do something new and exciting that challenges me and motivates others to do something, physical and mentally stimulating. And hopefully it does, and I'm looking forward to it.
It does. I mean, one of the reasons. For people that don't know, I'm lucky because I train at Parabellum, and it's like a hub for so many amazing athletes and people that come and go. So I met you there, but then when I was getting ready for Worlds, I mentioned this to you, but like I was following a lot of your stuff because you are very motivational, and there was a clip of you sort of talking about, signing up for things in advance, making consequences for yourself, squashing the deadline. And to be honest, that was one of the things that really motivated me to get out there and compete. And so I feel like it's important to have people like you because, I tend to be more of a depressed guy. So it's hard for me to just, if I just focus on myself, it tends to be more negative. But when I see people like you doing stuff, it's motivational. I mean, didn't you do a backyard ultra marathon in the middle of Corona? Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that and what went down. And
I thought that would be fun. For me, I was planning to go to Arizona in March, so just before COVID took off, before it kind of got popular,
right?
So to speak.
Before it got popular, right? You were an early adopter of COVID.
Yeah,
I remember.
Before it started going viral. But so my trip was planned for March break, and then I think right before I left, it was like, hey, if you do leave, you got to quarantine when you come back.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna take 2 weeks of income off the table when I get back.
Right.
And then the Monday that I was supposed to leave, I've already canceled my flight, and it was like, all right, everyone that is out of the country, get back home type deal. So that was for me. I was gonna do the Arizona rim to rim to rim down there. So you would run.
Okay, so what is?
You run from north rim to south rim,
Jesus.
back to north rim, and it's a 40-mile ultra. Like you're self-supported. It's not a race. It's just you doing it, but it's a pretty cool experience and venture, right? So that was my plan to go to Arizona. Obviously, hang out with the girlfriend down there. But I told her one day I gotta leave her by herself, and I gotta go run this. So then I was kind of training for that, and I was getting ready for that, and I liked having that ultra early on in the spring, and so that didn't go down. So naturally, I wanted to put something on that would again challenge me. I'm a very goal-driven individual, so for me, I like having things on the calendar to look forward to and train for specifically.
Yeah,
and also get people motivated, get people challenging themselves and doing something that they maybe have never done before, never experienced, and go outside their comfort zone and hit maybe potentially new PRs. And obviously, with the circumstances, we couldn't really put a race together where everyone got together. So the next best thing was a virtual ultra marathon where everyone would do 4 miles on the hour, every hour until there's one runner standing. And, you just try to accumulate as many miles as possible and many 4-mile loops as you could do. And it was great. We didn't get a massive turnout, but we got, I think, eight people, but it was great, man. A lot of people wanted to sign up for it, but what happens, right? The day before, it's when your cat died, right? And you can't.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I see that kind of stuff in tournaments in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a lot, right? Like everybody says they want to do it, and and then obviously as it gets closer to it, and that's why I think signing up for stuff like you kind of talked about in one of your videos is really important. Sign up early, make some accountability for yourself, give yourself that goal so there's like a consequence. Because I remember you said with a lot of your adventures that you paid like 12 months in advance, and so there was a financial stake at hand there. So I think that's a really interesting perspective, because I know for people like me especially, like I have a lot of chronic anxiety, and so I'm always kind of like, when you wait to jump in when the double Dutch skip ropes, but you never jump. So it's like I feel like I'm in that mode a lot. But when you kind of put money on the line and make those consequences, I felt like it really kind of gave me more motivation to do it. So I'm assuming a lot of people that kind of were thinking about doing this sort of did something similar, I guess.
Yeah. It's like you said, it's that financial consequence, the social consequence of telling. Again, at the end of the day, like you want to have integrity with yourself, but you want to have integrity with people that know you. And if you go out and you vocalize that, hey, I'm going to go do this backyard ultra in 2 weeks, and you don't do it, like, you lose integrity with those around you. Like, they stop trusting you. They don't see you as accountable or reliable. Yeah. And again, that is that's leverage, right? That you don't have anymore, because those are promising characteristics and traits that an individual should aim to possess. So again, but we get scared, right? So we don't vocalize it, or we don't put the money out. And then what happens is that we don't show up, and it's like nothing ever happened. But internally, regardless of how you put it, and you try to run away from it, it's like, hey, you didn't show up, and you know you should have. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do, right? They talk themselves out of it. They rationalize. They make excuses. They put masks on.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. Yeah, exactly. But you know what? It's one of those things. I'm glad the people that did come out had a great time with it. I think a lot of them set PRs, which is like so cool.
That's
to
awesome,
witness.
yeah.
That some people barely ran a 10K before, and they hit 20 or 24 miles in the day. It was pretty epic that way. It was really cool that they enjoyed it so much, and they were asking about, I can't wait to do the next one. So that's the kind of stuff that keeps me going to put these things on, because even if it affects 2 people, 5 people, 50 people, whatever it is, great, man. And I had fun doing it. There's no skin off my back, so it was a great time.
Well, it's interesting because I've been trying to. I mean, a lot of this started as me trying to find a way to keep myself engaged, not necessarily physically, but like, and I had people been sending me Q&A questions, and one of them was like, how are you staying motivated and connected to even BJJ and stuff during the lockdown? And one of the first points I said was, develop a new project and or skill. And so for me, it was kind of more this, but having something else to focus on, like a race or something like that, I think is a really good way for people to have a sense of accomplishment and momentum during a really shitty time, right? Because like you said, if you don't have a goal, life's going to pull you in a million directions, and you're probably not going to end up doing what you feel like you should be doing. But if you have something that's giving you a weekly or daily or monthly kind of goal, I feel like it kind of keeps you on track, so to speak,
Yeah, it's really easy to get complacent.
Absolutely.
It just is, right?
Yeah.
Especially being at home. I know there was that whole conversation when COVID did hit, that it was like, all right, now everyone's got no excuse to not have time, right?
Right.
Like, we have plenty of time. We're not commuting to work. But again, like, we still find reasons to be home and eat crappier and not move our body as much. And it's unfortunate, but that's for me, that's one of the biggest things, that I always want to have small purposes in my life and big purposes. And like I said, like I did that 5-tool performer article a few weeks ago that I wrote, and for me, it's like I'm trying to balance all those things, and that takes some attention, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't be a complacent if I'm trying to become that 5-tool performer.
Well, let's dive into that, because that's something I was going to ask you about anyway. First of all, before I ask you about that, how would you describe yourself, like for people listening? How would you describe what you do and what your sort of goal is in the role that you have right now? Is your profession, your career? Somebody doesn't know who you are, quite what you do. Someone says, "Hey, you're Brandon Rynka. What is your goal? What do you do?" Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd say I'm a wellness and performance consultant,
Okay.
because again, I would consult clients. I obviously have my personal trainer too, so I work with clients. But I also work with corporations, and I do speaking engagements. So, and for my I guess for me is like, I want to enhance people's performance. I want to enhance my own performance. So it's something that I dive into myself, and how I can become a great performer in all areas of my life. Then also transfer that knowledge and that education insight to other people in the corporate world, individual basis, and just kind of spread the wealth that way.
Right. So you're doing a lot of stuff. You're doing one-on-one coaching. You're doing blogs and articles. You're doing speaking engagements for different companies and stuff like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and then some fitness stuff with them too, right? So so it's good.
Well, there's a lot of stuff I want to get to, but I was going to ask you about this 5-tool performer piece. So give me a little bit of insight into that. I mean, I was looking into it a little bit, and I kind of like this idea that you talked about life being this game of chess and not checkers, and sort of, having long view in mind. So talk to me a little bit what a 5-tool performer is, and give me kind of like a bit of a Cole's Notes version of what those 5 pillars are, and how they're important, not just for sports, but like in our lives right now, especially going through, COVID and a shitty time.
Yeah. So like we see in life, there's a lot of areas of our life that we need to nurture to obviously be to run optimally, right? To be fulfilled for all pillars. So those pillars, the way I laid it out in terms of the 5-tool performer, would be physical, obviously. So you have the health side of things, then you have the mental, the emotional, the personal, and the professional, right?
Okay.
So you want to make sure you're nurturing all of those tools or pillars in some degree every certain day, right?
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that every single day you need to provide the same amount of attention to all those areas. It just means that you need to nurture those values in some regard every single day. There are going to be hierarchies. Some people are going to be more professional based, more physical based.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean you neglect those other areas of your life, because as you know, you could have 4 of those pillars crossed. You could be doing fantastically, professionally and personally and emotionally and mentally, but then you're not doing well in that last realm. And that last realm, or that last tool, is the thing that makes you feel lonely and depressed and have anxiety and all those negative emotions that we signify life with sometimes. So for me, I don't want to give myself an opportunity to nurture 4 of the 5 pillars, but then have that one pillar that, again, they all interconnect as part of a big ecosystem, right?
Sure. That's a great analogy. Yep.
If you're not doing well personally, you're probably not doing well emotionally. You're not doing
no, it's so true.
And you're probably not doing well professionally. Now, if you're doing well professionally, though, that doesn't mean you're doing well personally. So they interconnect with one another.
Right.
But again, that's why you need to make sure you're really nurturing all those areas to certain degrees. And there's ways to go about that I obviously went over in my blog, and of how to become a 5-tool performer in all of those areas, and certain things that you can do. So again, that's a whole 2,000-hour blog or video in itself.
People are paying you thousands of dollars to talk about it. I was trying to get a free sample here because I can't afford it yet on my modest podcast budget. So I was hoping for a few freebies here, Rinka, but I guess you're not throwing me any bread here.
Like in terms of physical, right? It'd be like taking care of your body, right?
Absolutely.
Taking care of your health. Professionally, going in with a motivated mindset, being a skilled performer, providing value in an act of service, and being of value to other people. Emotionally, right? It's not being emotional or irrational, but it's being more logical based. It's being aware of your emotions, intact with the environment, and adapting to the environment accordingly, knowing, hey, these are my values, and if I act in conflict with that, it's going to affect me negatively, and it's going to affect others negatively, right?
Absolutely.
Mentally, seeing things from a long-term perspective, like we talked about, chess versus checkers, right?
I think that's a great analogy.
A long-term perspective, a lot of the times, like a lot of the things I do invest in right now in my life, I might not get the financial reward the next few months or the next few years, but I understand I'm creating leverage for myself, right? So I'm playing the long-term game, knowing that in 5 years I'm going to be living a very optimal lifestyle, and I'm very aware of that, right? However we look at it, I'm going to be 5 years older 5 years from now, and again, I'm going to invest my time accordingly.
And I think that's such an important concept in all aspects of your life. Again, I had a question about about setbacks in the gym and staying motivated and that sort of thing, and I kind of argued in part is that sometimes the immediate gratification in life is the very thing that sets you back long term, right? I always use the analogy of like eating junk food, right? Like I love eating junk food. Like I would eat McDonald's every day if I could, but ultimately it tastes good in the moment, but then there's all these short-term and long-term ramifications from that immediate gratification. And I see people in the gym and competing and all that in the way that they train doing the same sort of thing, meaning that they're always worried about winning the round in that moment, and they're not thinking about maybe I should be trying different techniques, maybe I should be trying a different strategy so that I'm not the same grappler that I am right now in a year from now or 6 months from now. And so this idea of chess versus checkers, I think, can play out in so many different aspects in your life, from mental health to physical to competition to professional and all that sort of thing. So I really like that sort of analogy. And even the piece about this 5-tool performer piece, to bring it back to what you were talking about, is I talked a little bit about mental health in one of my videos, and it's the same sort of thing. Like I'm somebody that struggled clinically with like a very significant mood disorder, and there's a lot of it where people sort of want to rest on it as just saying, well, it's a disease, it's an illness, which it is, and you should acknowledge that. But I feel like if you're not looking at the most important things like your health physically, what you're eating, your socialization, your exercise, what you're consuming mentally, you're not really giving yourself a chance. And so I feel like that 5-tool performer, or these pillars, can apply on a micro and a macro level in so many areas of your life, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think
Yeah,
people,
100%.
I think people just, they look at just what's right in front of them as opposed to the big picture in their life and what's going on around them. And so you talking about 5 pillars is a much more dialed in version of that. So I would really encourage people to read it and check it out, because I think there's a lot of value in so many areas of your life with that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I got to the point, right? Because you would see people that are doing phenomenally professionally, but then they're shitty human beings.
Exactly. Yep.
Or they look like they're doing well personally, but then they have the emotional and the mental baggage, and they're always stressed out, and
yeah, exactly.
And they're not doing well from a physical standpoint, right? So they're thinking of lifespan rather than health span, right? And living a long, healthy life. And for me, they all interconnect, and it was like, well, you know what? You can see it. And a perfect example for me is a guy like Robin Williams, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Like from the out, and again, that's what fascinates me about the psychology of this.
Yep.
Is here's a guy who has all the money in the world, is loved by millions, has a great family, has all the financial freedom he wants, yet the dude kills himself.
Yeah.
Why, right? So for me, it's like, obviously something was going on in his life. One pillar he wasn't nurturing,
right,
and it pushed him over the edge. And for me, I think a lot of people, they dive into 3 thinking that those 3 are going to overcompensate for the lacking of the other 2, but you can't do that. You must nurture all of those to some degree, because you need that balance, right?
Yep.
So it's a very fine line, because I get people, I try to be a high achiever and a high performer professionally, but I'm still also very aware that I can't do that without, nurturing my personal side and my relationships and my time with my family, because again, all that without that is very lackluster, and it doesn't really have a lot of meaning to it. So again, it takes a lot of self-reflection. It takes a lot of, educating yourself on the subject matter. And you know what? It's for me, I've been blessed. I've had amazing people like yourself on my podcast. So, after you have, 30 plus conversations of people that are high performers, and they've all dealt with shit. That's the cool part.
Yeah.
We've all experienced hardship in one area, but we've learned to address it in a healthy, productive manner and navigate our way through it to live a more fulfilling life. And again, over time, it's just programming. The things I listen to, the things I consume, the conversations I have, I don't give myself an out. I never, ever say I can't do something. I take fault for every single thing that happens to me, good or bad. Right. I think when you do that, you take control of your life.
Yep. Well, and I mean, from a clinical perspective too, I'm sometimes careful to push back a little bit, just because there are, like, a guy like Robin Williams also too had something called Lewy body dementia, which is something that can cause, I think part of what happened with him too is there was sort of delusions, dementia, and I think as he got sicker and sicker. So I totally agree with what you're saying, but sometimes from a mental health perspective too, I'm always careful to tell people as well, to, if you're struggling, to like seek professional and medical help and all that kind of stuff. Don't be afraid to talk to a doctor or talk to a therapist, all that kind of stuff, because sometimes that's a pillar that's neglected too. We always think, there's nothing wrong with going outside of yourself to seek to help as well. It's all about
that's like the awareness piece, right?
Yeah.
Like, I need professional help.
Exactly.
Right? And that's healthy for you.
And it's getting better. I just feel like too, in the martial arts world, I think people are more open to it now in the jiu-jitsu scene and all that in MMA, but there is still sort of that, a little bit of the ego that can get in a way, or people think they're weak or whatever. But I mean, some of the best athletes in the world have mental health coaches. They have sports psychologists. So it's just sort of something I like to throw out on the mental health side of it too, because I think that it's helped me tremendously. And so sometimes I think, in addition to what you're doing, sometimes you need that extra. But you're right, it does fall into that piece of sort of awareness as well. But one thing that you touched on that was really big for me is this idea of sort of mental programming. And not that it sounds a little, it sounds intense, like mental programming, but it's actually very subtle in my opinion sometimes. Like, I notice for me, for example, with what I have going on in my life, is that my mind is always, it tends to drift to the negative very easily. It's just where my mind wants to be. I tend to be very dark. I tend to be very pessimistic, even though I laugh, and I like to laugh a lot. there is that sort of dark sort of thoughts and feelings into me. And sometimes that stuff's brewing under the surface and you don't even realize it. And when I listened to people like you and started to watch other videos and just what I was consuming, I found like audio podcasts, videos, movies, music, like I feel like that mental programming can be at the subconscious level, and it's just hearing more positive dialogue can really start to change sort of the conversations that are going on in your head. And so that was a piece that honestly was dramatically helpful at the Worlds and competing in 2019, because it started to just, without even doing anything super conscious, like I wasn't cramming stuff down my throat. It was just with listening to this, I just started to feel more optimistic and more positive. Can you talk a bit more about that mental programming piece and what your perspective is on it?
Yeah, like I totally agree with what you're saying. Obviously, it's you know, our mind is going to adapt to what it hears and what it listens to and what it consumes. So it just makes sense, right? That you take control of that and you program your mind in a healthy manner, right? So, and again, that takes that self-reflection piece, right? To be like, well, are the things that I'm consuming of a negative, you know, content? Probably, right? If you watch the news every single day, you can't just justify it and be like, well, I want to be, you know, well versed in what's going on in the world. You also have to take in, hey man, I'm hearing a lot of negative shit now. So again, it's like there's two sides of the coin there, but you need to be aware that you consuming 4 hours of Fox News and CNN every single day
exactly.
is probably not the healthiest thing compared to the guy who wakes up, listens to a podcast on mental health, physical health, listens to a guy like Gary Vee that gets rid of all excuses and rationalizations.
Or Brandon Rynka, the Canadian Gary Vee.
Brandon Rynka, sure. But you know what I mean? It's just over time
Yep.
start thinking about. And for me, for people that don't know my background prior to jumping into like my
I was going to actually ask you about that, but feel free to kind of go.
Just jumping around here.
No, I mean, that's the whole, let's do it.
But it goes into my mental programming. So when I first came out of university, I got into a direct marketing job, and it was a manager and training program, right? So I was doing sales and outside sales, commission based. So it was show up. If you don't sell that day, you're going home with nothing.
Was this job while you were also a male dancer? Was that just a different?
No, that was the same time, buddy.
That was at the exact same time. Okay.
Juggling them both. And so for me, every single day, especially on a commission-based job, like it was literally mental programming 101 every single morning. The owners would come in, they would get you jacked up. They would talk about entrepreneurship. They would talk about the mindset of a successful business owner, talk about financial freedom. And then once you kind of get good at it, then you have new hires come in. And then I'm doing the exact same thing every morning for an hour or two, just hammering in the principles of, hey, what you need to do to be successful today. And we're running down the 10 steps of success. When we get back from the office, we're breaking down the successes of the day. We're breaking down failures of the day or opportunities for tomorrow. Hey, what are some goals we want to work on? How do we adjust that negative mindset that happened at 2 p.m. where we got all nagged out and you couldn't make a sale for 2 hours? Like, how can we adjust that so we don't do that again tomorrow? So that was 6 days a week for a year of me, and then going out and applying that, talking to random people on the street where I had to smile regardless if someone said, get a real job. Or, you know, and it was just like the best teaching I could have asked for, because, again, it literally programmed me into thinking a certain way. It motivated me to read about success, read about entrepreneurship, read about taking control of your life. And, again, it just became one of those things that spiraled into, okay, man, I can't afford to say it's anybody else's fault but mine. You know, I can't afford to be, you know, impatient and just try to force everyone to adapt to me. So it was a really good learning experience. And again, it was just that I knew that my programming was so important at that point because I was just taking in phenomenal content that was motivating, goal-driven, and allowed me to think a certain way. And I saw when people weren't doing that and they had an environment that was negative at home, maybe the parents were saying,
absolutely.
What the hell are you doing? Like, why are you working this job? And now I go in the office and I got to talk them off the cliff of like quitting that day. It was just one of those things that I saw both ends of the spectrum, and I saw how powerful negative programming was of them going home and their parents saying, get a real job, compared to the next morning Brandon Rynka had to show up, and I had to motivate the shit out of these guys for 45 minutes before we hit the field that day. So for me, I was like, this is a massive contrast that I am seeing go down right in front of me. Someone who's literally like, I'm going to quit this morning, to holy shit, I want to run a business. All that, the only difference was you heard negativity the night before, you heard positivity in the morning.
Yep.
And you went from, I want to quit, this job sucks, to I want to run a business and make a lot of money. And it was programming, 101 right there. And for me, I was hooked on the idea that, hey, like, I can do this for people, but I can do this for myself.
Right. Yeah, it's so important too, and it's like, it's almost like, it sounds like you're taking more of an analytical approach to progress and success too, right? You're kind of taking a bit of the emotion out of it, you know, and especially that piece around failure and being able to look at what you did sort of objectively from a distance. Because again, this is something that I talked about in a recent video, and it ties into training, is that, you know, we all seem to think that progress is linear, right? And so we beat the hell out of ourselves when things don't go right, and we get mad and our ego gets in the way. But it's really not a big deal unless you just disregard it. Like, you need to be able to look at the failure, and it doesn't mean it's a cheesy, like, hey, you win or you learn, because sometimes I think we overuse that, but you should let that failure guide you, right? Like, don't get so emotional about it. Try to look at it as it's telling you something. And so your approach to that with this sort of positivity is reframing failure in a way that's like, okay, I don't want that to happen again, but really the failure is pointing the way. It's saying, okay, you got to start to do this a little bit more. And I do think we are too negative. We get caught up in that cycle a bit too much. And so listening to sort of that positivity as well sort of helps us get through those sort of moments, you know? Because I mean, I've seen so many people get derailed by setbacks and failure, and they immediately beat themselves up, when really it's just part of the process. I'm sure anybody in your position, I'm sure you've had a million setbacks in your job, and these, like, you were doing high stress stuff, right? You were doing high stress sales jobs, right? Like pressure, like trying to hit quotas and numbers. So it's like, I guarantee your progression wasn't a straight line. You probably failed a bunch, but instead of saying this is bullshit, I'm going to quit, you just said, okay, I went in the wrong direction here. How do I correct course? And you move forward. And I see that in jiu-jitsu training. People get so discouraged about losing. And it's like, if you commit to doing something well, whether it's a sales job or jiu-jitsu, the failure is going to happen. It's baked into the formula. It's just what you do with it that ultimately determines whether you continue to make progress or not, if that makes any sense. Do you know what I mean?
That makes perfect sense, man. Like, it's like you said, like, failure is kind of guiding the way, right? It doesn't mean you have to celebrate failure.
No, like, I hate it. I hate it. I'm not, like, I say that, and I beat the hell out of myself, but I talk about having, like, selective amnesia. Like, I'm just kind of like, okay, I was super discouraged on my drive home, but it's like, I go home and I take what I can, I take a shower, and it's like, what am I going to do? There's nothing I can do except take what's valuable about it, and the next day is like Groundhog Day. It's the same, you repeat, but you can do something different this time. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So anyways, I didn't mean to cut you off there. But...
No, for sure, man. But what's the alternative?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You either don't do it tomorrow and you don't show up and you're the same shitty person that you were that day, and you're worse because you actually quit and you chose to walk away.
Yeah.
Or you go, hey, man, that's one bad day. I got my ass kicked today. Wasn't my best performance, but guess what? I'm going to show up tomorrow. It's the growth mindset. If I continue going at something day in, day out, and I actually, use certain techniques to allow myself to develop in an intelligent manner, like asking advice from mentors, right? Like you have the disposal when you go into a gym to have killers around you to be like, hey, man, can you show me what you know? Can you show me this tech? Like, you have the option. So for me, it's like, what's there to be discouraged about? Just be like, hey, man, like, they all started off where you started off. And I think, again, when you know that and you come from a very aware point of view, it shouldn't hurt you, because you're like, it's just, I used to be a guy who would resent sometimes people doing so well because I was so damn competitive. But then I got to the point
I
now,
still do. No, it's just...
no, but I get to the point now when I see someone do something really cool or awesome, I'm like,
no, for sure.
I appreciate it to such a high degree. I'm like, that person just put so much time and effort into that skill set. But the thing is, I'm confident in saying, like, well, if I put that much time into it, I would be just as good. So I'm not hurt by it. I'm just like, this person has more time under their belt. why should I be butthurt about it? I'm just going to appreciate that this person worked on it, just like I have certain skill sets that I've worked on for years that they don't have, and that they should just appreciate it because I've put the time into it. So, there's no reason that we should be resenting that. We should look at it as inspiration and be like, man, everyone started from ground zero.
Yep.
They stuck their feet into the ground. They took a step forward every single day. Maybe they went backwards a couple days. But again, over the long haul, they achieved their goal, and they're pursuing something that stimulates them in a positive manner.
Well, and the other thing that I think I mentioned, I've talked about, is that we always look at a lot of these people we see from a distance, and we see the finished product, right? We look at Michael Jordan, and we're like, he's the best. But we, especially in this Instagram age and the social media age, it's always the highlights of the day. And like, even I've heard people talk about Gordon Ryan in jiu-jitsu, for example, and they say, well, he's just gifted and it's bullshit. But like, I've heard about how insanely meticulous his training is. Like, and people don't see that, right? You see these top athletes and you think, oh man, you're jealous because you think that they somehow had this like cakewalk to the top, right? Because you're just seeing they're not seeing all the stuff on the cutting room floor of all the frustrations and the injuries and the shitty days at practice and the setbacks, right? So it's easy from a distance when we only show the very best of what we're doing. And so I think we all go through the same thing. We all have those struggles. It's just, it tends to be more the people that stick it out through that mess. And they just say, well, I'm not going to quit, Even me, like in I talk about jiu-jitsu, like I'm not anything even remotely special. I don't believe I have any natural talent.
Yes, you are, Paul.
No. And I'm not saying this out of some sort of stupid false modesty. It's true. I've seen so many people, and I continue to see so many people that have way more ability than me, and learn faster and more athletic. The only thing is I'm a meathead and I'm stubborn. And when I first started, I was not good. I was the worst guy in my group. But it's just because I guess I deal with the setbacks better because I was never somebody that was gifted. So I never had that like, oh, I'm really good at this. I've always just had this like, well, I'm just going to go through what I have to go through to get where I am. And I feel like so many people quit along the way when if they had just stuck it out, they could have, the delayed gratification thing, right? They're not getting the immediate gratification of winning in the day, but if they'd stuck it out for 5 years, they could have been unbelievable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's what, 90% of the population?
Yeah.
If that was the case, we'd all be fit and we'd be purple belts and brown belts in jiu-jitsu, and we'd be high performers and high achievers, and life would be awesome, right? But unfortunately, because so much of the world looks at it from that immediate gratification standpoint.
Yeah, it's so true.
Now you're looking at it from like 8 out of the 10 people around me are probably thinking the same way that I'm thinking. So we're enabling each other. Yeah. Like, come on, like, just skip the gym tomorrow. Like, this is more important. Like, it's just stupid shit that you're like, if you put an ounce of self-reflection and analysis into your decision-making, you'd be like, well, that's not what I actually want. Like, that's just that limbic system coming out being like, all right, this feels good now. But, like, you just relax yourself. First, I don't think people know what they want, to be honest with you. I don't think they've taken the time to
No, you're probably right. They're just sort of
Yep. Yeah, like they're going through life like rolling dice, thinking that like, well, this stimulates me. This gives me purpose. This gives me meaning. This makes me happy. But does it really though? And then to look yourself in the mirror and go, well, that doesn't actually make me happy anymore, right? It's a tough thing to do, and it's a mature thing to do. So sometimes it's just easier to grit your teeth through it and convince yourself, well, this is, again, think of the mentality of my parents and your parents probably, were like, they talk about work not being fun. Well, work's a job.
Yeah.
You need to show up and you got to get your work done. Like, that's their mentality. For me, I'm like, I don't want to live life like this, So it's just a weird mindset that people get locked into.
Sure.
And again, because so much of their environment is that's all they're hearing, So I don't blame them to a certain degree, but at the end of the day, they need to have the awareness to say, hey, well, this is 90% or 80% of the world. So naturally, the shit I hear isn't the correct, version of it. It just happens to be the majority. Yep. Right? So it's a tough one to navigate, but awareness is key.
It's so funny, too, because I think back to myself when I was in high school, and it was like, I was so clueless. Like, I've always been a late bloomer to sports. I was an overweight kid, and there was like this negative feedback loop where it was like, I'd already go into something with a bit of a negative mindset because I didn't think I was good enough at it. And then I would struggle at it, and my immediate response would be like, well, I guess it's not for me, right? Because I always, when I was younger, I had this like stupid idea that like, oh, if you're good at something, then it shouldn't be like a struggle, you know?
Sure.
And yet that was the thing that got me so off course in most things in my life is I didn't understand that the value of that middle shit show where it's like, it's this mess of you're going all over the place, but that's how you get better. Like I tried to play basketball in high school, and I ended up playing on the senior team, but I mean I sat the bench, but I never played organized sports when I was a kid, so I was kind of clueless, you know. So it's like I didn't really have a mentor at that time to sort of be like, dude, this is what it's all about, you know. So I would get discouraged, and it was like this negative feedback loop, right? Because I'd go in with a bad attitude or a pessimistic attitude. Something wouldn't go right, which inevitably it will, because it does for everybody at some point. And then I would have like negative dialogue in my head and listen to negative stuff, and then it would just be this vicious cycle. And it's literally taken me, and I still struggle with that and always will to some degree, but it's taken me like 40 years. Like literally this last year was like the first time I was like, oh, okay, you know, and it sort of started to come into fruition. So it's like, you know, if I'm old enough to figure it out, a lot of people can, but you're right. It's just, we're not always aware of our own negative thinking patterns and how much it can really fuck you up in the long term, you know? So
when you know how bad it can be, and how, you know, strong programming is, like, it should scare the shit out of you.
Yeah.
It terrifies me when I hear something negative. I'm like, holy fuck, man, I'm going to start thinking that way.
Yeah.
I'm going to start seeing life through that lens. And I'm like, I can't afford to do that. Like, I have too many goals on my horizon to be dealing with this bullshit. Like, this is not one thing I respect of, obviously, you know, Siri City, right?
You've been working with him. Yeah, he's a great dude.
Great dude. Great kid, man. Very self-reflective and
is he
philosophical.
really? Yeah.
Yes, you know, well-read kid, and again, this is a perfect example of programming. He makes me laugh because he doesn't know a whole bunch about what's going on in the world. Like you could ask him a question that should be kind of obvious about something, and he doesn't really know it. I'm like, but he's like, I don't listen to this shit. He's like, that's not part of like what I'm trying to do, and I'm like, I respect that because I'm like, this guy's just so linear and focused on balance and healthy decisions that like shit that shouldn't be really in his vantage point. Like, why would he care about? And I'm like, you know what?
He still thinks George Bush is the president? Man, this Bush guy is fucking everything up right now. What is going on?
That's like me, man. I don't know
who the hell. Yeah, what's going on?
I don't know who the hell our last prime minister was.
Oh yeah.
For me, I'm like, hey, when I need to know, I'll know. But I'm like, right
you still think it's Pierre Trudeau that's the prime minister right now? Yeah, close enough.
Man, Pierre looks young.
Yeah, that man, he's aging like fine wine. Look, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience with athletics and with martial arts. Now, I understand you were you couldn't just be a one sport athlete in university. You had to be that son of a bitch that was a two sport athlete. Is that true?
Yeah.
I read that on your Wikipedia page. I'm campaigning to get the Brandon Rynka Wikipedia page up and running.
Let's do it.
So you go to U of T. What was your sort of athletic background there? What did you play? And how did you ultimately get sort of into the martial arts thing?
Yeah, it's a long story, but I was a transfer baby, right? So I was going out of high school. I was all about playing football. I could care less. I could care less about what I was studying. I was like, man, I'm just here to play ball.
Just straight meathead. I would have loved to meet meathead Brandon Rynka back in the day.
It's not much different than now. I'm just a little bit more well read.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So. Yeah, it was one of those things. I didn't care what I was studying. I just wanted to go play ball, and I was very convinced. My mentality is very much like it is today. I was just way more impulsive and emotional.
Right. Okay.
So I go to McMaster, and you know, I was so confident. I'm like, all right, man, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna be an all Canadian soon. Yep. Shit's gonna be good, right? Doesn't go that way. I wasn't highly recruited, and then. I had a lot of resentment. I had a massive chip on my shoulder. I'm 5'8". I probably had a 5'9" chip on my shoulder, and I was just a pissed off dude after not getting the attention I thought I deserved. It's one of those things. I didn't have long-term thinking in place. I was like, fuck these guys. I'm fucking out of here when this year ends, and I'm transferring.
Yeah. Just angry Rynka.
Angry Rynka, man. I'm gonna go ball out somewhere else. And I'm gonna show these guys, right? And I eventually end up at UFT, and it ends up being a pretty good fit from an academic side of things. It was a good fit. I loved the school I went to, University of Toronto, Mississauga, and then I started playing football there. I played 2 or 3 years there, and I played special teams, and I was a backup safety. And the year that I was it was my second year, and then I was on the verge. We had a kid from Florida, the Florida Gators. He actually won a national championship there.
Okay.
His eligibility ran out, and he came here to play ball.
Oh,
so
damn.
He happened to be safety, so I was like, well, there's no chance I'm beating him this year. So,
what are the odds of that?
He was an absolute stud. So
yeah, for sure.
I was back up to him that year, and so he left the next year, and I was like, all right, man. So this is my time. I finally get to start, do my thing. All training camp, I'm starting. I'm doing really well in spring ball, and the coaches at the last minute were like, hey, B, we're going to probably put you at halfback. I'm like, yeah. He's like, you're an aggressive kid. We'll put you in the box, make some tackles. I'm like, that's cool. But they put me to a backup role. So then I'm like, so I didn't do anything wrong at safety, but you're putting me to a backup role at halfback. And again, young, emotional, pissed off Brandon didn't like that. And, I played the year out and, did my thing. I got injured game 2.
Oh, wow. What happened?
Just a high ankle sprain.
Oh, that's nasty. Yeah.
Ironically, the safety that ended up starting over me, where I was playing halfback, he shit the bed game 1, and then I was supposed to start game 2, and that's when my ankle went down in game 1, and then the third string safety jumped in. So, long story short, shit happened in football.
Yeah, for sure.
It was time for me just to kind of move on, and I was like, all right, man, this is where it ends, and I'm gonna go wrestle. And so I joined the wrestling team, and
oh man,
that was my final year of sport, right? So I joined the UFT varsity wrestling team, and it was a fun experience. I got to compete at OUAs, and
You did. Talk to me a little bit about that. Yeah, what was the room like back then, and what was your So had you ever wrestled before? Or you just
I grappled.
Okay.
At a jiu-jitsu club before, but with a gi, it was very very.
Very very different, right?
Once a week type thing, just to kind of learn how to protect myself. Growing up from grade 2 to 6, I was in point fighting stuff, right?
Okay.
So I won 3 golds in competitions when I did the point fighting when I was younger, and then It was something that I was just kind of forced into as a kid, so I never loved it. I just did it, and I happened to be pretty good at it. But once it was time I could move sports, I did. But when you get older, when it's your choice, you kind of find your way back into it. So I had a background of knowing how to grapple for my size.
So you didn't go into this just with being an athletic guy and thought, okay, yep.
No, I could grapple, I could do things, but I never officially wrestled. I was just, but even when I was in the jiu-jitsu clubs, I was usually a stronger wrestler for never actually wrestling. I was just a grappler. I was a strong kid that could explode through people. So I was like, all right, this will work out well. And then
the jiu-jitsu people love guys like you.
Yeah, I found that out. So not the prettiest guy in the mats, but so I ended up wrestling there that year, and like I said, it was a cool experience because it's a very unique sport, and
absolutely,
it's very very meticulous, and just I don't know, it's just I love athletics, right? And it teaches you something at every level, and at that level, it's just the guys are so good, and it's a great experience. Yeah. And again, trying to catch up, that's a tough sport to catch up to when you're jumping into it. You have guys that are in their 4th year of university wrestling, and here I am. I'm 6 months of blue collar, wrestling training, and now I got to go compete against these guys at OUAs, and won a couple matches, and I wrestled for bronze and lost, but it was a fantastic experience, and I was really happy that I did it.
Oh man, that's incredible. I kind of wish that I had been exposed to wrestling a bit younger. We didn't have it in high school. It wasn't even on my radar. I didn't start jiu-jitsu till I was older, but of course training at Parabellum, I've had a lot more. That's probably one of the biggest things that's changed in my game, is that I actually really like to wrestle now. I mean, obviously, I think I have pretty reasonably good wrestling for jiu-jitsu, but obviously you go against people like Chris Brickett and even Nav, a guy who's been awesome in helping me at Parabellum. He's a young guy that wrestled for Guelph, I believe, and it's such a crazy experience. I mean, Nav's probably 30 pounds, 140 pounds, but feels like you shoot in on their hips and it feels like you're hitting a brick wall. Like it's wild, you know? And I think that for me, that was a piece that was always kind of missing in my jiu-jitsu is I think for me, the combination of doing a bit more of traditional in the gi and then transitioning to more of a wrestling base was really kind of a missing ingredient that really helped propel me. It almost like even just that mentality we talk about, I feel like it's so prevalent in wrestling. Like these guys are just, I do think it's got to be up there in the toughest sports in the world. I think it's so physically grueling, but these guys are like, especially the ones that do well, are real like winners. These guys are determined. Like talk about a sport with setbacks. I mean, it's ultra competitive. You're beating the shit out of your body. You're probably having good weeks, bad weeks. You know, in inner squad competition, and there's a lot of in-house sort of, you know, scraps and all that kind of, not like super fun, but like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of hard-nosed competition. So I think it's a sport that's helped me mentally too, right? Because the very nature of wrestling is that you shoot the double, you kind of get sprawled on, but you wrestle through all the positions. Yeah. You know, for me, it sounds cheesy, but for me, it's almost a bit of a metaphor for life in that it's the whole idea. If you think you're going to go into a wrestling room and never encounter frustration or setback, you're out of your mind. I mean, the successful wrestlers are some of the toughest people I've ever met mentally, and there's a reason for that, you know? So did you feel like, is that something you kind of saw or noticed in wrestling, or was that even on your radar then? Or
yeah, for sure. Like you could tell it was just like a gritty sport, right? It was a tough guy, stubborn sport, which is why I liked it. I was in football. That's what I was, an undersized guy, right? I was playing in a world of giants, and for me, I had to make up for it in like, you know, my aggressiveness. I had to be the hardest hitter for my size, right? I had to kind of make up for the lack of being that, you know, tall, lanky, athletic dude. And I had to be more explosive and powerful, right? So it was a smooth transition, but that's why I liked the sport. It was a really good transfer of skill sets that, you know, I had to be low, I had to be explosive, I had to be gritty, I had to be in the, you know, in the rabbit hole, and I had to go at it, right? So it was just, you could tell, man. It was, I remember one of the practices against this Iranian guy, and he was a high-level guy. He was really high level. He was competing high level at the OUAs, and I think we were just kind of going at it in practice, and like his snap down my neck afterwards, like holy fuck.
Oh man,
yeah. And you're like, this is some real shit, right? So and you adapt to it, and you're like, all right, so this is what this sport is. And it was again, after a week, after you like your neck kind of gets accustomed to it, you're all you're all good to go. But it was one of those things that you're like, this is my kind of sport, right? And you find your niche, right? And that's why you see a lot of nerdier like guys do jiu-jitsu a lot. And Rory, you kind of talks
you pointed at me when you said that. Is that you're like, you nerdier guys over here?
No, they get into it because they're more passive.
It is absolutely
more analytical and thoughtful, and they're really good at just pacing themselves accordingly. Where for me, I'm a little bit more meatheadish, and it's like I just want to go at it. So it's just a different sport, a different environment, and you know it's cool when you can crossbreed that, and you see those guys develop into the gritty guy when they need to be.
Well, I do think, you know, that's one of the benefits for me about training at Parabellum, and it's not to slag on jiu-jitsu, but yeah, it's a little more, it's kind of this go with the flow sort of thing, and I know training under Rory, he's very much a wrestler at heart, right? And so I do think it's a bit of an Achilles heel, and I do think it's one of the reasons you're seeing some high-level BJJ guys struggle more in MMA or not having quite the success, because it tends to be much more physical no-gi. There tends to be more of a wrestling influence, and it tends to be more aggressive and more physical. And I do see a lot of more modern players, once they take the gi off, struggling more because, you know, it's harder to restrain your opponent. It's harder to control them. But for me, I've always liked that because I feel like I know a lot of guys in the gi get frustrated because they'd grapple with a guy like you. He's a brown belt or something, and he takes the gi off, and suddenly you're a big, strong, physical guy with some experience, and you're giving him a lot of trouble. And so they kind of like, they always sort of, in my opinion, sometimes they sort of slag no-gi for that reason in some respects. But I always wanted to go towards that because I felt like for me, if that was happening, you know, wrestling with or grappling with some of the pros, I felt like it was a deficiency in my jiu-jitsu. Like I didn't want to be the guy that as soon as you put me in a gi and I can kill everybody, but I take it off and suddenly I can't do shit, you know? So I like that idea of transferable skills and versatility. And I do think wrestling is starting to have a really big influence on no-gi and jiu-jitsu in the future. I think that's kind of the wave of the future. You see guys like, I don't know if you follow much of jiu-jitsu, but there's this guy Nick Rodriguez that trains with Gordon Ryan. Big athletic guy, clearly has a lot to grow in terms of technique, but he wins, I don't know if he won bronze or so, I can't remember. He medaled at ADCC. So he's out there with all these world champions, guys that have been black belts for 10 times as long as he's been training. And so you're seeing this new hybrid athlete coming in, wrestlers, and they're giving people a lot of trouble because they're going to catch up with their knowledge on the ground in terms of submissions and stuff. But so that's part of the reason I've loved to train at Parabellum, is I want to find that middle ground between the flowy jiu-jitsu, but also not being afraid to go hard-nosed. You know what I mean? And
yeah, it's having that balance, right? At least knowing a little bit of everything, so you can then pick your battle.
Yeah. So talk to me just a little bit about your competition experience, because I remember we all did a tournament together. I think it was Grappling Industries in Toronto.
Yeah.
So how many jiu-jitsu tournaments have you done? And tell me a little bit about your experience with that.
Yeah, so that was my first one, right?
Okay.
That was the end of my 365-day challenge that year.
Yep.
So my last month was to do 30 days of a new discipline, and that month happened to be jiu-jitsu. And then I remember there was an in-house tournament, and Rory spoke to me afterwards and said, "Hey man, I think you got good potential to do well at the Toronto grappling industry, so you should sign up for it." And at that point, I got pretty invested doing 30 days of jiu-jitsu in a row, and I was like, all right, this is pretty cool shit. So and again, I'd like to have things to train for, and competition just makes sense. So
it's something you're used to.
Yeah, something I'm used to, something I like doing. So signed up for the tournament, and then grinded out a lot of matches that day.
Oh, dude, I have this footage of me in one of my matches, and we were side by side. And I remember you were just having this like epic battle with this giant gorilla of a guy too. And there's this point where I'm watching a replay of my match, and I see you two just out of nowhere just come charging. Like, I think you shot a double, and you both went rolling right into the middle of our mat. It's awesome. It's like this highlight. I got to send it to you. It's great. But do you feel like I want to just pick your brain a little bit? I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do want to pick your brain a little bit in terms of, you've got a lot of experience in the gym. You're training a little bit with Siri. You're training Siri, CD, a pro fighter at Parabellum. Do you feel like, I mean, obviously for MMA, but do you feel like for jiu-jitsu, strength and conditioning is essential? Or do you think you can get what you need training something like wrestling as well in the gym? And what would you suggest maybe to people that are looking to make the most of themselves on the mat that way?
Well, end of the day, like if you're a high level jiu-jitsu competitor, like you want to optimize your training, you want to optimize your roles. So if strength conditioning is a major component of you performing at a higher level, right? So it just makes sense that to be more explosive, be more flexible, mobile, have more power through your hips and glutes and hamstrings, that posterior chain, be able to push off and navigate positions in a more comfortable manner, break grips. That just makes sense. Strength train, right? Mm-hmm. Do things that are going to enhance your ability to do so. So again, end of the day, the way I look at it, if I come across a guy of equal skill on the mat and he happens to be way stronger than me, then that's a problem. So for me,
yeah, absolutely, yeah,
it goes into like, well, if I'm here in jiu-jitsu level, and again, I've made up for my lack of jiu-jitsu level with my athleticism and aggressiveness, and strength and ability to maneuver positions. So that's just one example. Now, not at a high level by any means, but I'm just saying I've been able to transfer over at a decent rate with very minimal jiu-jitsu skills based on those other cross-training principles. And a guy like Siri City, for example, again, he's going to meet guys that are equally as long and athletic and intelligent, but then if we can transfer over power, to his shots because we are strength training and allow him to use way less effort in certain shots while wrestling, be able to control guys down on them. And he talks about it, right? He's like, man, when I'm wrestling, I feel strong. We do a lot of grip work stuff. Again, we're holding shit for a long time. We're activating the core. The glutes are firing. And he's able to hold and pin much bigger guys down now because he has that power. The guy's squat went up 50 pounds in 2.5 months by doing primarily posterior chain work with me, right? So again, that's only going to enhance his ability to roll efficiently on the mat. So I think if you're not doing it, you're definitely not maximizing your potential. That's for sure. But again, you want to think in terms of what I'm doing in the gym. How is it transferable to my sport? Not just doing bicep curls.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was just going to ask you that.
Or doing shitty squats, right? For me, I'm very aware of, okay, well, if I'm, again, especially as an endurance athlete, I still do tons of strength training. I always think in terms of, like, hey, how is this going to affect me and make me a more efficient, economical runner or swimmer,
absolutely,
or biker or cyclist, right? Or a grappler. So I'm always thinking, well, I want to maximize my training. I don't want to go in there, and we've talked about this before, but I want to have a specific intelligent training, right? The things I do,
absolutely.
I want there to be an effect for the greater good. It's not just me going in there with no plan of attack and doing shit. And that might take,
yeah, which is very common, you know,
because again, we're in the fitness industry. We kind of know, like, we see people doing stuff. We know what a bench press is. We know what a squat is. So we do shit, but we're either using wrong tempo. We're not firing the right muscles. We're not engaging the muscles that are actually going to transfer over to our given sport. And that might take a little bit of education, some mentorship, whatever it is. Get it. You know, be confident in that environment. But again, it's only going to help your situation. Because like I said, I never want to be the guy who has no skill set in that given range, where I meet a guy of equal strength and then he happens to be enhanced in that one area because he's actually cross-trained appropriately.
Well, the one thing I've noticed about training at Parabellum is that very thing, is there's a lot of guys that I maybe have been training longer, but man, the conditioning is great, the physicality is there, the strength, the endurance. And it, at some point, if I get tired or anybody gets tired, it doesn't really matter how much skill you have, because at the end of the day, fatigue just makes you more and more useless. You know what I mean? And it's that ability to kind of continue to go. I ask you that because it's a piece I've never really explored. I mean, one of the big things that I had success with was really maximizing my training in the gym. I'm somebody that struggles a lot with fatigue and energy, and I can't really afford to be spreading myself too thin. And so one of the ways I improved my conditioning was to wrestle more in those classes, up and down, and I felt like that was good. But the other piece that you mentioned too is that your workouts are great, and you know, at some point I would love to do some sessions with you, because you're not in there doing bro splits. Like, you're not, you know, Brandon's not like, okay, Monday, here we go, let's do chest, Tuesday buys and back and buys. Like, your stuff is very, very functional. Like, it's all core, like, stability, and I can see that translating very well. And one piece that I get really frustrated with sometimes is I see people like Gordon Ryan, he put out a DVD called, like, How to Become a Swole Grappler. And I love the guy, he's great, but, you know, most of these guys are on steroids. They're on performance-enhancing drugs. And on top of that, he's in there doing bicep curls. I mean, I didn't watch the DVD, but a lot of it he's doing, like, just basic stuff. And it's like, okay, that might work for Gordon Ryan, but for the average person, that's, especially if you're natural, you got to do things the right way. And I don't think you're going to get a much bang for your buck just cranking out bicep curls, you know? It's got to be explosive, dynamic, full body type stuff generally. I'm sure there's room for accessory work. Is that a piece you'd agree on as well?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think you got to invest time in the majors, and you know, because at the end of the day, like, I've had a gentleman on my podcast, strength coach Dan John out of Utah, and one of the things he talks about, and he says, like, if you can overhead press 200 pounds, you have strong triceps. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like, you don't need to do tricep kickbacks and be like, I'm getting strong triceps. Like, no,
get that horseshoe.
Yeah, like, lift some heavy shit over your head, or you know, and press and pull and squat and do that kind of, because you're gonna, it's all attached. That's why there's
a lot of crossover.
It's compound movements. Like, you're using multiple muscle groups to move that weight. So sometimes we get so caught up in, like, again, it depends. If you're a bodybuilder, go do as many goddamn kickbacks as you want.
Yeah, exactly.
That horseshoe and get proportionate. But if you're an athlete trying to be functional, don't wait. And again, especially because you guys want to roll more, you want to grab, you don't want to be putting a lot of time in the gym. You're not going to do 5 or 6 days in the gym.
Exactly.
It might be 2 or 3 days strength training. So what are the best exercises to get the best bang for your buck? And that's what you got to invest time into. And you don't want to be beat up the next day either. So it takes a lot of manipulation.
That's the key. Yeah, absolutely, is finding that balance, right? Because you can't, I see people that, And again, it depends. I mean, we all have variable abilities to recover from a certain load or whatever, or volume. But I do see people, like I've had people come up to me where they're literally training less jujitsu to do more weightlifting, and they're thinking that that's going to get them farther in their sport. And I kind of say to them, weightlifting's great, but you have to also keep in mind, like, you're still trying to develop at your primary sport first. Is that
and there might be phases, right?
Absolutely.
So if Siri, for example, he hasn't had a fight in months because of COVID, right?
Right.
Knowing that, he could have reduced his training load, or intensity, not his load. He could have got, and I know he did. He got plenty of like just pad work done, slow, form, technique,
skill development.
Now we can go balls out on strength training. Let's get his squat up 50 pounds, and let's get his glutes big and strong, and let's make sure his posterior chain, his core, and everything is firing appropriately. And then do your sessions, have the volume there to a certain degree, but just dial back the intensity. But then when it's time to training camp comes up, okay, we'll dial back the load potential.
Exactly.
We'll use sub-maximal load, and then we're gonna go hard in the gym. And so that way, when he goes into training camp, boom, he's strong, he's effective, he's healthy, and it's a great scenario.
Right. It's not a question of I'm on a strength routine and it's the same 365 days a year. It's periodized and all that kind of stuff.
You might roll, right, and notice, like, man, I'm rolling all the time, but I'm so goddamn weak. I'm having a really hard time with strong guys. Okay, maybe for a month or 2 or 3, you roll. You don't roll as aggressively, or you're not as frequently. Maybe you don't do 8 rolls and you do 2 rolls after class,
sure. Yep.
For example. But then you dive into 3 or 4 days of real strength training. So the volume gets reduced to a certain degree, but you're investing your time more intelligently at that time to actually enhance a weakness. So it's all about awareness at that point.
Well, that's such a big point.
Attention to detail on.
Okay. Well, that's actually super helpful stuff, man. Look, I don't want to keep you too much longer here. We've gone through a lot of stuff, but there was one thing that I just wanted to ask you was, and I think this would be really relevant for people now because I think people are really unmotivated and they're struggling, but it's just a concept. I saw a picture of you on your website where you're doing this. You're doing a speech in front of people, and in the background, the picture just says "motivation is shit." And I just wanted you to explain what that concept means, and what, because I think a lot of us expect to have these sort of like, moments where suddenly the world makes sense and we all get going and do what we want to do. But I think it's a really important concept. So could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So what you're referring to is basically like the presentation I did when I did say motivation is shit, just from the standpoint that motivation comes from the emotional state that we're motivated, right? We're happy, things are going well, we listen to a podcast, whatever it is that we now have this surge of energy and excitement to do something. So relying on motivation and relying on that external feeling of, hey, I need to feel good to do something is shit, right? That's like looking outside and saying, it's sunny today, I'm going to go for a run, compared to being like, oh, it's gloomy or rainy or snowy, I'm not motivated to go for a run. So we can't rely on motivation and for us to be in a positive state of being. As ideal as that would be, that's not reality. We know that we need to rely on discipline. We need to have that ability and that grit to say, hey, man, I might not be motivated right now, yet I'm going to act in the conflict of not being motivated. So that's where I feel like motivation is something that comes and goes, right? Some days you're extremely motivated and you're ready to take down the world and run an empire. And the next day it's like, man, I got no drive to do this. But again, it's understanding that, hey, that's still what you want. It's just right now your state of being isn't quite at that high level of motivation. And that's okay. It just know that, hey, I need to insert some discipline into those times when I'm not as highly motivated as I want to be or think I should be.
Well, I think that's so important because I feel like when you make something a habit, becomes habitual, it's more powerful than motivation.
Yes.
You know, because I feel like there's so many days where I don't want to train or do whatever. And it's like, sometimes you think, well, I'm not motivated. It's not the right time to do it. I should rest. I should relax. And sometimes there's a place for that. But I just think that's such a powerful kind of concept in the sense that, like, that's a fleeting thing, right? It's like an emotion, like you said, and it's going to come and go, but it's sort of like to get where you want to be, you can't just wait for those moments that it all feels like it's clicking and it's right. In fact, sometimes the best things happen in the moments when you didn't want to be there, you know?
Exactly. And hey, man, when the motivation is there, maximize the hell out of it. That's why I say, like, when you're really excited, sign up for it, right? If you're in whatever realm, you're all of a sudden like, my God, like I wish I could compete at Worlds. I want to compete at Worlds. Know that motivation is fleeting and is going to go.
Yeah.
So if you know that's the thing that you really want to do intrinsically, internally, that is the thing that you desire to do, sign up for it when your motivation is at an all-time high, connected to self-awareness, so you know you actually want to do it. So the times that you're not motivated, you've still signed up for that thing, you're still committed to it, you're still going to do it, so then it makes the discipline that much easier. So hey, maximize motivation when it's there, but realize when it's not there, you still got work to do.
Right, because especially when the nerves and the fear start to come in, that's when you sort of say, well, I don't want to do it. So you're almost letting that kind of doubt creep in a little bit. So I think that's really great. And just one thing is, well, then I guess with people that are struggling right now, what would you say to people that are at home, they've fallen off the wagon, they're out of their routine? What would you say to them to kind of get them back on track, or any tips to kind of help them get through what's been a rough period?
I'd say go towards the lowest hanging fruit and whatever those 5 pillars, right? The emotional, the mental, physical, professional, and personal, right? What is the lowest hanging fruit that you could do tomorrow that you know is so easy to do? You might be like, man, like I can do 5 minutes of that. It's nothing. Well, you know what? It's a step in the right direction.
Yes.
So that can look like, okay, for physical, that's gonna be like, I'm gonna go out for a walk for 10 minutes tomorrow. Sure, that 10 minutes could lead to an hour. That's phenomenal. But again, at least you know you can do 10 minutes. Like, come on, get out the door and walk. So again, find out in all those pillars of your life, what is the lowest, what is the easiest thing to do? What is the thing that would take zero basically effort to do, and do that. And then nurture that every single day. And the more you do it, obviously, the more you're looking forward to it, and it should blossom from that standpoint. But again, do something. Write out your values would be a great one. I think the action is great, but not knowing where you're coming from a psychological standpoint is where people are very hindered. Because again, I can give all the tips and insights of how to be actionable tomorrow, but if you don't have the why or the understanding of what's the point of this, it's gonna be very, very hard for it to be sustainable. So write out your values. What are certain things that you have to have in your life, that you have to nurture to make you feel full, from all those pillars, all those standpoints, and then write that list out. And then remember, every single day you need to nurture those values in some regard. Like I said, there's going to be a hierarchy. Some days that might look like, well, family only gets 10% because I have to work a 12-hour workday. But at the end of the day, you still got to make sure you're there to tuck kids in, speak to your wife, run down your day. That could look like 10 or 15 minutes. But again, make sure you're nurturing all those values once you know them, and understand that it's incredibly important to not neglect any of those.
Yeah, I think just that piece, it's almost like you say nurturing. It is like planting seeds, and you just never know how you think something's insignificant, and you just never know what it could lead to, right? So if you think, oh, it's only a 10-minute walk, but that could lead to you running an ultra marathon in a few months or something. You just never know. So I think that's a great point. How can people find you online? How can they buy your shirtless calendar for the new year?
I got to give you one of those first. So it's Brandon Rynka 365. Brandon Rynka 365 on my website, BrandonRynka365.com. Instagram-wise, Brandon Rynka 365. Twitter I don't use too often, but Brandon Steven for some reason. But yeah, Brandon Rynka 365 is the go-to.
It is the Fear Being Average podcast. That is up. Is that on Spotify, and it's on iTunes and all that kind of stuff, or?
Yeah, it's everywhere. Definitely on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Those tend to be the most viewed platforms. So yeah, Fear Being Average podcast, and I have guests like yourself, just high achievers, and they're given sport or profession, talking about wellness, optimization, performance. Okay,
last thing before I let you go, tell me just a little bit about what this last project you have coming up here on August 14th. What are you up to?
Okay, yeah.
I want to know how many fucking trees you're putting on your back, and what's going on here.
Yeah, just one tree this time. So we're doing what I called North America's strongest ultra endurance project. So I'm blurring the lines of strength and endurance here. So I'm basically using the Ironman principles and disciplines. So the swim, bike, and run. I add some mileage onto those just to make it a little bit more difficult, and I add a tree to the swim. So I'll be doing a.
You actually are doing a tree again.
Yeah, I'm doing.
I'm doing a crazy SOB. I love it.
I'm doing a 10 kilometer marathon swim.
Okay.
So that should take me a few hours. Then I got to cycle just body weight for 200 kilometers. And then I need to run a 100 kilometer ultra marathon. And then after that, I add in a strength component where I do a 100,000 pound total lift with 1.5 times my body weight in weight for the bench press, deadlift, and squat. So I weigh 170 right now. So I'll be doing 250 pounds on the bench, deadlift, and squat until I accumulate 100,000 pounds. And that'll be at the end of the swim, bike, and run.
That is unbelievable, man. You are very inspirational. I hope you stay healthy. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you want to touch on or talk about, dude?
No, buddy. You covered it all. That was a good talk.
All right, man. Look,
you having me on here.
Man, I really appreciate you. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast. You're a great dude. I appreciate all the motivation. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Hopefully, I will see you soon. We got to get you back at Parabellum when shit gets going. So we can get you back on the mats. But I appreciate the time. Everybody check them out. Check out the Fear Being Average podcast. Are you still doing the 2 Athletes and a Mic podcast?
We've been on a very long hiatus,
okay.
And it's hard for us to get schedules going. So let's just say don't hold your breath on getting an episode, and just check out the check out the Paul Federici BJJ podcast.
Yeah, all right.
And the Fear Being Average podcast. Those are the two to lock into.
All right, brother. Much appreciated. Stay healthy. Thanks so much for doing this, and I'll see you next time whenever I see you.
Thanks, PFed.
All right, brother.
Good
Don't
talking.
die on the trails, for Christ's sakes. Your heart's gonna fucking explode with all this shit you're doing.
Try not to, buddy.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Or
Okay, well,
Brendan. What a fucking idiot.
What'd you call me?
I just called you Brendan, but.
Hey, what?
All right, guys, check out Brandon Rynka on Brandon Rynka. He's the competitor of Brandon Rynka 364.
366.
Yeah, 366. He's your competitor. He just rounds up to one more. All right, have a good one, man.
All right, see you, bud.
See you, dude.